Well, we have already seen a vast amount of American history, ladies and gentlemen. Now, it may seem odd to say that given the fact that at this point in time, our nation is barely 20 years old. But look at the changes that have happened in the world. I mean, we stood up to the strongest imperial military power on the planet. We tried and then rewrote our entire system of government. We've actually had two separate presidents. So there's been a lot going on. But as we get into our third president, and we're looking at this is the triumphs and travails of the Jeffersonian Republic. Keep in mind, by the way, that travails means, a very, very difficult labor, trying very hard to do something that is very, very difficult. And we're going to see here in the Jeffersonian era, you're going to see a lot of really impressive triumphs that we as a nation are going to have. And you're also going to see the way that when push comes to shove, a lot of times, especially in politics, people have to figure out what is most important to them. We spoke before about the strict construction versus the loose construction, the interpretations of the Constitution, and what Jefferson believed. He is also going to find out now that being the one complaining about the president and actually being the president are two very different things. You don't always get the luxury of doing everything you actually want. So we're going to look at both Federalist and Republican mudslingers. Remember, we have essentially two political parties at this point in time. We have the Federalists, which would be President Washington, President Adams, Alexander Hamilton. And then on the other side, you have what have been referred to in the book as Jeffersonian Democratic Republicans, or we're just going to refer to them as Republicans, because that's going to make it so easy when you hear Republican to think what that meant in about 1800 as opposed to what it meant today. And the Federalists and the Republicans are going to have a great fight for the presidency coming up. Now, we like to think that politics today is dirty business, that you have both sides are mean to one another and they throw mud and disparaging comments, etc., etc. But trust me when I say that the world of today has nothing on the way they fought back then. A lot of people like to think that once upon a time politics was more genteel, more polite, more kind-hearted, with only the best interest of the nation at hand. Yeah, no, in this case, the Federalists and the Republicans were just as good at throwing mud at one another as any politician is today. The only difference being they didn't have mass media. In the election of 1800, the Federalists had a host of enemies. They had made a great number of people upset. In particular, all of this came from the Alien and Sedition Acts. Now, you might remember that the Alien Act went through. It changed how long you had to live in the United States before you could become a citizen. It set things up to make it easier to deport what were deemed enemy aliens at that time. And then the Sedition Act literally made it illegal to say anything mean about the president. So when you have very important, rock-solid, foundational aspects of our republic, things like the freedom of speech, for example, you are going to end up creating a lot of enemies. And that is exactly what happened here. The Federalists had gone through and they had done all this in their mind, best choice possible. But they found out that the American people have a very distinct ability to make up their own mind, that they decide for themselves whether they feel the policies of a particular government warrant them getting another chance. So in 1800, the Federalists were suffering from a great deal of dislike on account of the Alien and Sedition Acts. Now, the Federalists had been most damaged in the public mind by John Adams not declaring war against France. Now, we talked about this previously with Washington's declaration of neutrality and with Adams' decision not to declare war on France. While we do have the benefit of 2020 hindsight by looking back to the past and seeing that, yes, that was the right choice, it's not as easy to do that in the moment. It's more difficult to know what the long-term consequences of your decisions are going to be while you're trying to make them. And in this case, Adams, your failure or refusal, depending on your outlook, to declare war on France ended up causing the Federalists to lose credibility in the eyes of the people. Now, the thing is, the Federalists, they had gone through, they had raised a bunch of taxes, They had built a good Navy. We actually have one of those ships is still in service with the U.S. Navy to this very day, the USS Constitution. You can find that in Boston. It is known as Old Ironsides. It is still an active Navy ship. You can take tours on it and whatnot. It's quite interesting. So they had built a Navy, and then they didn't have any real reason to justify the spending. They had gone through and they had done all this stuff. They'd raised the taxes. They had built the Navy. They had done A, B, C, and D. But then they hadn't really done anything with it. They refused to use any of this and declare war on France. And so, as a result, a great number of people in the U.S. began to feel that they had acted fraudulently, that they had gone through, that they had worked very hard to get all this money, to build all this stuff, but it wasn't really for a good cause. And you have to remember, at this point in time, the whole concept of a standing army or navy like that did fill a number of people with dread. They were very concerned that if there was a standing military all the time, then that meant that the government could use that to suppress the people. So while they had gone through, they had gotten the money, they'd built the Navy and all this, a lot of people were quite upset with them. We had not done anything with this, and the question was, well, then why did we do it? As an aside, one thing about all this was that John Adams really has become known as the father of the American Navy. He was the first president to actually go through and create, a department like this for the Department of War, or rather the Department of the Navy. And we were really able to benefit from this in later years. There had been the thought that really all we needed was a few little coastal patrol, ships or something like that. But Adams had helped create, a blue water navy, one that could go out on the high seas. So Adams, even though he does get all of these critiques from a great number of people, he does go down in history as essentially being the father of the American Navy. Now, you also have to take into account that Federalists launched attacks on Jefferson. They had a number of different things. Now, you can go back to any modern day political campaign and you can find all sorts of attacks and all sorts of things that, one side will claim the other did or didn't do, or this, that, or the other, and things like that. For example, in this case, the Federalists said that Jefferson had actually robbed a widow and her children of a trust fund that was rightly theirs, that he was basically just a dirtbag who had gone through and stolen money from starving children, essentially. Another accusation that was made was that he had fathered numerous children with his slaves. Now, I have this in parentheses. It says, which turned out to be true. There is debate about this. Our textbook does, say that it is, just a given. I think it highly likely. I think there was a high probability of this. I cannot say with 100% certainty. They have done some DNA research in regards to this, and they have proven that a member of the Jefferson family did father some children with some of the slaves. The thing that I've read, though, is that they cannot narrow that down to one individual. So I leave that up to you. Go ahead, do all the research you want, find out what you think, make your own decision on this. I have read different things that the slave in question, Sally Hemings, that while Jefferson was in France, that she was essentially the lady of the house. It was, like she was, for all intents and purposes, behaved and acted as if that were Jefferson's wife. Now, I cannot confirm this. Like I said, this is 100% up to you guys. Go through, do whatever research you want on this, and come to your own conclusions. I leave that up to you. Another attack on Jefferson at the time was that he was an atheist. He is often referred to as being a deist, and a deist is defined essentially as someone who believes in God, believes that there is a God. However, they also believe that God is like a clockmaker, that he created the universe, put everything into action, and then just basically has left it all alone from there, sort of a distant, non-connected God kind of concept. So the referring to Jefferson as an atheist at this point was a huge slap in the face to the political world of the time. And so they said things like this and other inflammatory remarks. And don't think that on Jefferson's side that they didn't say anything against John Adams. The Federalists and the Republicans both were very, very good at slinging mud. There's one I remember with the Republicans referring to John Adams as an old, bald, crippled, toothless, things like that, and they went off on a bunch of things along those lines. So keep in mind that politics in 1800 was just as rough and tumble as politics in 2020. The only difference, like I said, is that back then they had newspapers. That was about it. That was their form of mass communication, that and word of mouth. Today, we have mass communication, we have the internet, we have social media, we have all this stuff. Information travels at light speed, essentially. Not so much then. It took a little bit longer, but make no mistake, there was always a lot of mudslinging going on in American politics.